Henry Clay, the Great Pacificator. Henry Clay was an important part of the Union's victory in the Civil War. If it weren't for him making the Compromise of 1850, the war would have started earlier, therefore the United States would have had a different president, the North would have had less railroads, and they would not have states such as California, ultimately leading to the Union's defeat.
Henry Clay was born on April 12, 1777, in Hanover County, Virginia. He was the seventh out of 9 children from Reverend John Clay and Elizabeth Hudson Clay.
In 1781, British loyalists killed Henry's father and looted their house. Henry's mother remarried 10 years later, and in 1797 they moved to Lexington, Kentucky. In 1799, Henry married Lucretia Hart, and they had 11 kids. Clay died on June 29, 1852, from tuberculosis.
Clay's politics were somewhat like Jefferson's. In 1803, he was elected to the Kentucky General Assembly and was one of the founders of the American Colonization Society.
In 1806, he was appointed to the U.S. Senate at the age of 29. Then in 1811, he was elected into the House of Representatives and later became Speaker of the House.
He was the leader of the War Hawks, and he pushed the U.S. to go to war with the British in 1812. Although he wanted war, he was able to compromise with himself to negotiate a peace treaty when it was needed.
Clay's viewpoint on slavery was blended. Although he owned slaves and treated them well, he still labeled slavery an evil and a curse on both the slave and the master. Since Clay condemned slavery, he tried to outlaw it in his home state of Kentucky. Henry Clay wanted to keep the U.S. together because slavery was tearing them apart. He wanted there to be a gradual emancipation of slavery, which needed lots of time that Clay didn't have. He did his best to delay the U.S. from going to war with itself, and in doing so succeeded in emancipating slavery.
Henry Clay was a huge part in the North winning the Civil War. Since he delayed the war, it allowed the North to gain advantages over the South, leading to the Union's victory and the emancipation of slavery.
The tension between the North and South was on the brink of war, and Clay knew that he had to do something to stop it, so he made the Compromise of 1850. Without the Compromise, the war would have started 10 years earlier, so the Compromise may have been the biggest thing that helped the North to win the Civil War. One way it helped was by giving the North another big state. The Compromise states resolved that California, with suitable boundaries, ought upon her application to be admitted as one of the states of this Union, without the imposition by Congress of any restriction in respect to the exclusion or introduction of slavery within those boundaries.
This part of the compromise made California a free state, giving the North another big state that was growing rapidly because of the gold rush, and also serving as a precedent for states getting inducted into the U.S. in the future.
Although this compromise made California a free state, it also made Texas a slave state, making the numbers of free and slave states equal.
Without the compromise, the war would have started 10 years earlier, giving the North thousands of miles of railroads not built yet. In 1861, the North had about 13,000 more miles of railroad than the South did. In 1850, the gold rush was just starting, so the North had less railroads than they did 10 years later.
The South also would have had less railroads just like the North, but they didn't have as much of a railroad expansion in the next 10 years than the North did. Railroads were a huge advantage for the Union in the Civil War. It gave the North a means of transportation for food and troops. The railroads could also supply troops that were in need of clothing, food, or weapons.
The railroads gave the North a big strategic advantage over the South. Multiple battles were won because of railroads allowing the North to send troops and supplies quicker to help their army win. Without the railroads, the South would have had an even chance of winning.
The Compromise of 1850 delayed the war by 10 years. If that delay didn't happen, we would have had Millard Fillmore as president during the Civil War. Millard Fillmore never got a formal education in his life, which might have made him make bad strategies or decisions. Whereas when we had Lincoln as president, he had his formal education and he was a huge part of leading the North to victory in the Civil War.
In conclusion, Henry Clay's compromises were the leading factors for the North to win the Civil War. His compromises delayed the war for enough time so the North could make more railroads, induct more states into the Union, and get a good president for war. Even if Henry Clay didn't mean for his compromises to have this type of effect on the war, it did, and without him, the South would have won the Civil War.